District, Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District of 2012. He is known for his involvement in several progressive state laws, including the Americans Job Act, Compassionate Care for Rape Victims Act, and legislation requiring paper trails for electronic voting machines, protecting collective bargaining rights, and establishing domestic partnership protections. Mark has earned a reputation as an adaptive legislator who can bridge Wisconsin's political divide and win progressive victory. Please join me in welcoming a true friend of labor, Mark Pocan.
Well, good morning. Very glad to be here with you this morning. Usually when I'm back home, I do my best not to wear a tie, but I'm flying back this morning to Washington, D.C., so I apologize up front for getting you this way. But I just wanted to just raise a couple issues with you and then just open it up for, see if you have any questions. I'll do my very best to try to answer. I know we've met at various times and we've had a chance to talk about things, and there's 2 or 3 issues I'd like to just bring up. One that we've had a conversation about before in Washington is the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal that's out there. And let me just give you an update, because we've had this communication for a while. I've been working on this since I got to Congress. And by working on it, I mean working to defeat the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because we know in this room that it will cost more American jobs and it'll depress our wages here. When you're trying to compete with Vietnam, when the minimum wage is pocket change on the dollar, you can't compete. You can't compete fairly. And we have been doing everything we can to try to stop it. Now we know in the last year, the Trade Promotion Authority did pass, only by about 8 votes. And that was giving the President the final ability to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. We, again, narrowly gave that trade authority to the President. What that means, just as a reminder, is that we can no longer amend the trade deal when it comes to Congress. And we have limited debate. And I think that limited debate is a little over a couple minutes per member of Congress. So it's a pretty raw deal that I think we got out of that, but that's the trade promotion that was given. And now we have the final language of this trade deal. And the concerns that we had, that this would send more American jobs overseas, depress our wages, the fact that the labor law provisions aren't as strong as the provisions are for big corporations who want to try to sue over things through what they call the investor-state dispute settlement process, which is a 3-person tribunal of corporate lawyers. So if you have a complaint on labor law, like we recently did with Guatemala, I believe it was Guatemala or Honduras, it took 6 years to get resolution through the legal system. Through this special system that's set up for corporation that still exists in the trade deal, a corporation can sue a state or a local unit of government that passes a higher minimum wage, that passes a law that tries to protect our tax dollars staying with U.S. companies. They can sue that, and it doesn't go to the court system. It goes to a 3-person tribunal of corporate lawyers that literally work for a corporation on Monday. Tuesday and Wednesday, they're the fair arbitrators of the law as a member of this tribunal, making a decision, and on Thursday, they're back on the payroll of the corporation. You can pretty much guess where that's going to go, if they're going to side with the corporations, these multinational corporations. But that is still in there. There's nothing dealing with currency manipulation whatsoever that's in there, so we're going to feel the brunt of that. And all the other provisions around the environment, etc., are still in there. So it's a bad deal in the end. Is the language marginally better in some areas? Yes. But is it enforceable? Likely not. And that's been one of the real problems we've had. Some of the little side agreements around labor and around the environment that the administration and Republican leadership has been extolling are not enforceable. So ultimately they're nice, they may be poetic and beautiful, but they're meaningless. That still is there. Now, having told you all the bad news and the things we kind of knew about the deal, let me give you the good news, and I think there is some really good news about it. First of all, Republican leadership in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has said it won't come up till at soonest lame duck session. So that means no one's rushing to pass this thing because they think it's going to help them get elected. I think everyone knows that there's a lot of pitfalls in this deal. Senator Hatch, a Republican, senior Republican, has said it could be years before it comes up. Years before it comes up. And one of the main reasons is a real problem, and this is where sometimes interesting bedfellows can be helpful, that may help those of us who care about the middle class, is that in that special tribunal, the reason I highlighted that is that's one of the reasons where we may be able to defeat it. While that's been in past trade deals and Republicans in general don't have a problem with that, Australia, one of the countries that's involved in this deal, has very, very strict anti-smoking laws. And they insisted that tobacco wouldn't be able to access this tribunal process, that they wanted to maintain, like a pack of cigarettes has like a, a black pair of lungs picture, literally. That's what they use, like they have very, very strong language on this. So exempted out of use of that is tobacco. Every other multinational corporation can sue, but not tobacco. The problem is, a lot of tobacco areas are represented by Republican legislators. And a lot of them have said they're going to vote against it. I got a chance to serve on the advisory committee after we passed the Trade Promotion Authority to the President that Paul Ryan chaired that was supposed to help the U.S. Trade Representative understand where the sense of Congress was. And while we brought up issues of labor and environment and other things, the tribunals, the Republicans brought up over and over this issue of tobacco. And when it became law, that actually may be the one issue that's in the end is going to help us defeat this. So we are still working on it. There are no substantive changes from what you've heard about in the past on it. There's nothing in place that's going to, in my opinion, stop a bleeding of jobs in both the manufacturing and the service sector in other countries. But the good news is this thing may be a document that goes in the history bin on paper and never passed. Because it's got some real pitfalls to face yet. And we just have to be diligent to make sure that everyone that we can influence in our state continues to be with us, and if they're not with us, that we try to get them on board with us. And I do want to give your union at the national level special props, because we meet weekly on this issue. Members of Congress, labor, environment, consumer groups, and always there's at least one, if not two representatives from the Machinists who've been with us each and every single week as we try to fight this. So I am optimistic. I see a potential silver lining in that one strange provision may be enough, but we are meeting on a regular basis to make sure that we can get the problems of this trade deal out there. And since it's unamendable, it's an up or down vote. You either vote with that or not, and we're going to continue to work on that. And that way, hopefully, we won't have the job loss. Second thing I want to bring up, in just the general state of where labor's at, and I think we are at a pretty precarious spot when it comes to labor. And, I come from painters and allied trades. I've had a union printing business for 20 years come May. And I do a lot of our labor work in Congress for the House Democrats. And what we have seen are pretty much continued attacks on labor. In fact, I would argue that when you look over time, the various groups the Republican Party puts out there to fear, to attack, they put out a decade ago, it was gays and lesbians. If they marry, the country is going to fall apart. So far, we're doing all right. Then it was immigration. And that issue now, largely, although it's a central issue in the campaigns, I think if people look at this nationwide, the Republicans could potentially never be a major party again if they don't do something about immigration. Public opinion has shifted considerably. But the group that they're attacking the most right now are working people via organized labor. There's serious attempts at all levels of government to try to attack unions. And why? Because it's because of the collective voices of everyone in this room that we have better pay and benefits for employees of unions. The people who work with unions for an employer get on average 27% more in pay and benefits than someone who doesn't. But here's the problem. In the 50s, we reached a high of about 1 out of every 3 people in private sector work belong to a union. Now we're at about 7%. And we've seen these attacks in our own backyard, right here in Wisconsin. First it was the uprising, the collective bargaining changes under Act 10 to go after public employee unions. Then they came after us with right to work. Then they changed prevailing wage. It's just this piece by piece by piece attempt to try to take apart the ability for unions to have your voice, not just because what you're doing is fighting for the middle class to get a fair wage, but also because they see it as a way also to hurt Democrats, because in general, labor has been a little more tied with the Democratic Party because of our beliefs, not for anything else, but generally Democrats have been better on labor issues, and that's been the rationale. We see the same thing at the federal level. They're trying to take apart rules. President Obama, because of Congress's inaction, to make it easier to go after how we do overtime pay, trying to change minimum wage, at least with federal contractors, because that'll have a ripple effect, trying to address pay equity, trying to address sick pay leave, address things that overall will help lift our wages. And the bottom line, I think the most central part of how we lift our wages again, because this has been an economy that's come back in every way but our wages. That's the only thing that's been dead flat, and almost all the gains have gone to the top 1 or 2%. The one central issue that would do more than anything is our ability to collectively bargain, our ability to form a union. And I think that one of the issues you're seeing happen, both through rules that the Obama administration is trying to do, and central in the presidential campaign dialogue, is what we're going to do to help make it easier to form unions. There's a bill that Senator Sanders and I have that would significantly change the timeline process for when people decide to have a union, what it takes to form it, and the time that it takes. Because one of the tactics we've seen from far too many companies is they put up all these artificial legal challenges that they can through the current process, and you can wait 1.5 years or longer and still not have your union in place, even though a majority of employees have signed and said they want to be able to do that. If we can keep the candidates focused on that and making it fair so that if people want to have a union, you can have that union, to me that would be the single strongest thing we could do to help bring the middle class back up and raise our wages back up. So we just have to keep fighting for that. But I'll tell you, the good news again out of this is every time I've seen one of these attacks happen nationally, when they go after a group of people as the people to fear. Remember, somehow all the budget problems in Wisconsin were the problem of public employees, and yet we all know that was a lie from Scott Walker. They still have budget problems even after all their changes. It had nothing to do with it, but that's the lines they put out there over and over. When they do that and they go too far and they lie too much, it comes back our way. And I think we're going to come back out of this stronger than ever. And if we actually get things like immigration reform, which I think will happen absolutely in the next Congress because of the next president that will come in, that's a brand new organizing opportunity. I mean, we are looking at some ways to increase membership and to be able to get our unions back and allow us to have that collective voice to bargain for greater salaries. So again, I'm hopeful, but a lot's going to ride on this fall. Let me just close with this part of it, and then I'm glad to take any questions you might have, anything in Washington or other. This November is going to be a really, really key November, and I don't want to get all overly political, but I think we have to look at, no matter who you're supporting in the presidential race, at the end we all got to rally back in November, because it's going to be more and more clear by then who's going to stand up for working families, and who's going to allow you to have greater rights to collectively bargain, and who's going to continue some of these movements forward to raise the minimum wage and to extend things like sick pay, and who's not. And while it's primary season right now, I can't wait to get out of primary season personally. I'm a little tired of watching. I don't know if you watched the last Republican debate. A friend of mine recently, his 9-year-old daughter said, "Daddy, they're fighting like teenage girls." Yeah, they kind of are right now. They call each other names and they go through all that. But when we get to that final campaign, it's important that we're back and that we're judging people by their actions and not just their words. Because I'll tell you right now, if Donald Trump is the nominee, he's saying some really good things around trade and unemployment. The problem is, look at what he's done around employment. You got to judge their actions maybe rather than their words at campaign time. And there is nothing more important, in my opinion, than having that White House. Now that I'm in Congress, I never saw it as close as I've seen it. And having a Democratic, in my opinion, president, but having the presidency allows you to do so much, especially when you have a dysfunctional Congress. And the Congress, if it doesn't change, you'll continue to have the same dysfunction. Paul Ryan came in and we promised a new day. Problem is that same 40 or 50 hardcore Tea Party people that have mucked the process up are still mucking the process up. And last week we were supposed to mark up a budget, and we couldn't even mark up a budget because they can't agree on what they voted on in December, what they passed. They can't agree to do a budget to those very numbers. So we still have some of the same fundamental problems. The power of the White House is they have executive orders, and if they use them, like President Obama has, last year he signed an executive order to increase minimum wage to $10.10 for federal contractors. While that may not seem like a big jump, it is at least a jump enough. Federal contractors are 22 to 24% of the workforce. You do that, you have ripple effects in the economy. He signed an executive order around non-discrimination in employment. He signed other executive orders. Right now he's doing executive orders around labor issues. Those are really hard once they're put in place to take back. And that White House is really important. So again, there's whoever you're supporting, if you feel the burn, if you're on Team Hillary, if you're for someone else, we got to coalesce at the end, because it's going to be really important, because that presidency does matter a lot, especially if Congress doesn't change. There's a lot of work to do. So I just wanted to, again, be here with you this morning before I go back to Washington, because as much as the issues I talked about are out there, I am optimistic. I mean, I see the fact that the way they've done that trade deal, they went too far. And I think we have a chance and a place to try to put up that firewall and stop it. And as much as the attacks right now are on the people in this room and our friends and neighbors as they attack working families, I see again what's happened historically when they do that. We will come out of this stronger. And we will be able to make sure that we're lifting wages and working conditions for people. So we have a lot to be hopeful for yet. You just have to realize right now you're in the eye of the storm. But as long as we're all there together, I think we'll come out of it pretty strong. So thank you very much. And I'm glad to take any questions that you might have. I can do my best to try to answer.
Oh, one question.
Yeah.
Do you think the president's going to have the courage to appoint this Supreme Court judge?
You know, we were just talking about that. I'm sure he will. I really would be shocked if he didn't. How could you argue that by mid-February that we don't have the ability for the rest of the year to approve a nominee? I mean, it'd be completely unheard of. And let's also remember, the president may be at 50% approval. Congress is at 9% approval. To argue that we can't, in 10.5 months, do our jobs when we barely are doing our jobs right now would be really tough for people like Ron Johnson in Wisconsin and Senator Kirk in Illinois and other senators in tough districts. And I think you're already seeing how they talk about it a little different. So they'll probably do everything they can to try to muck the process up. But 10.5 months of inaction and leaving a Supreme Court like that would be very difficult, I think, to explain to the people, especially when you're at 9% in the poll. So I'm a little hopeful on that. And just an aside, if I can, just to add to this, even though it's not directly to the question, many of you may be familiar with the Friedrichs decision that we were expecting in June. The Friedrichs case before the Supreme Court would basically do to public employee unions what Scott Walker did to them here. It would change how they collect dues and things and really do have a devastating effect on them. It's based on a case with teachers in California. Because of now having a lock court, what happens is the lower court's case standing will be in place, and that was positive for working men and women. So we actually, in that sense, may be in a good place because that decision, they don't hold for another person to come on board. If it doesn't get resolved probably by June, we're going to be in a good place. The lower court decision will stand, and we'll be able to at least protect public employees for now through the way that we've always operated with unions. Yes?
Born in 1960. Do you see traditional conservatives or Republicans rallying around Donald Trump, assuming that he's almost a lock to be the nominee for the Republicans? Do you see them coming together, supporting him if that happens?
Let me answer it two ways. Because first of all, I want to share something that's a bit of a myth, but if you watch the news, right, there is no one better at getting on TV than Donald Trump. I used to watch Celebrity Apprentice, right? I watched the show. He's an entertainer. Every day he captivates that free news market. But this came from my pollster, and I'm going to give you, it's a little bit of math thing, but let me just do it because I think it's helpful as we talk about this. You have Democrats, Independents, and Republicans in this country. For easy math purposes, let's say they're each a third. They're pretty darn close. Let's say they're each a third. So of Republicans, that's 33% of the people. People who vote in primaries are about a quarter of that. So now you're down to about 8% of the people in the country. He gets generally, he did a little more in Nevada, he got 46%. Generally he gets about 30 to 40%. Of that 8%, let's take 4%. Let's get on the upper end of that. Or 40% he got. That's 3.2% of the people in the country are saying, Donald Trump is my choice. 3.2. Just do the math on it, right? So that tells you there's still a lot of good potential where that's at. Now, having said that, I think it's important to keep that in mind, because the news cycle, you think, oh my God, Donald Trump is doing so well. He still is at 59% across the board if you ask people disapproval. People realize they're in trouble a little bit with him as a nominee. We have polling that we've had the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee that show us Ted Cruz or Donald Trump could give us a wave here. We're down 30 seats. Either one of them could potentially give us a wave. And then I take my own personal gut feeling into it, and I think Donald Trump is probably a little stronger than Ted Cruz because he was on TV and he might bring out a few people that, vote celebrity or might not vote. Ted Cruz brings nothing new. But you're right now Donald Trump would be the nominee unless they can coalesce behind someone else. You're starting to see a few people, Governor Christie and the governor of Maine, a couple people trying to get behind Trump. You're seeing a lot of establishment, but not all of establishment, getting behind Rubio, trying to find him to be the alternative right now. But I have another theory. And this is a theory that came from a conversation. Chuck Todd from Meet the Press was in Wisconsin for the Wisc Politics anniversary in November, the 15th anniversary. And he said this, is that if you get to a brokered convention, which with 3 or 4 active candidates pulling votes you could very likely get to. And a brokered convention means you don't have enough delegates going into the convention to be the nominee. They may look outside because what they've got is Cruz they know would be devastating for them. Right now, polling-wise, Trump is devastating for them. Rubio is like the last choice they have, and there's no chance that Kasich or Carson can be the nominee. I think there's a decent chance, and Chuck Todd said this in November, 15 to 20% chance that you'll have a nominee that's outside of any of these candidates. And there's 2 people that they'll pick from, in my opinion, on that list. One is Mitt Romney. However, I think they may not go back to Mitt Romney. That 47% figure he said is still going to stick with him. The other is Paul Ryan. And Paul Ryan probably has the best Republican brand in Washington right now. And there's a reason he took the speakership, right? I mean, to try to become president the normal path as speaker, the last person to do that was James Polk in 1830. It's not exactly the path to be president, yet we know what Paul really wants. I wouldn't totally dismiss that as a scenario. So as you watch this, if Trump continues to dominate, he will be the nominee. They'll figure out how to love him. But right now, they're all trying to figure out how to not make him the nominee. And what we're hearing is, like, the Rubio folks are getting ready for a brokered convention. The problem is, he's still not their first choice. He's the first choice of what they've got left. But I still think there's a good chance you could be taking someone outside of the candidates that you have. So it is fun to watch right now. Although that debate, I'll tell you, I just caught the tail end of it. I was in Washington, and I don't have cable out there, so I just watched it on the computer when I got home, and I just caught like the last maybe 20 minutes, and I was shocked. If you watch Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and, I respectfully disagree, well, the senator's right, the secretary's right. I mean, it's just a whole different demeanor here. Liar, did you pee your pants? It's a whole different tone. And I answered that really long, I apologize. But I do think people have to know the math of it. So right now, Donald Trump is really popular around 3% of the people in the country. So, a lot could happen between now and November. The problem is, if we don't all coalesce and get where we need to be, I think, in November, then someone like that could be president. And you make my job a lot tougher. I'd rather you didn't do that. So, thank you. Other questions? Yes?
Going along with what you said about, say, if Paul Ryan would be the candidate, how would he fare against Hillary?
Well, that's untested right now, right? The thing is, we know a little bit about Paul from the national stage because he was running for vice president, so they vetted him a little bit, which is part of why he'd be attractive. They've already done the, what's your 10th grade friend going to say about you and all that stuff. But there is a big contrast, especially in age and things like that. There's also a huge contrast in vision. And while I think that people like Donald Trump probably wouldn't be real happy that he got that far and didn't get it, and you might have someone who's very irate, and I think it would be hard for them in November. It's also someone fresh who hasn't gone through this ugly, ugly process for either side that could be interesting. I just think you're going to go back to it. Paul Ryan's the nominee. We will be talking about Social Security and Medicare ad nauseum, because this is the guy who wants to privatize those systems and wants you to invest your money in the stock market instead of in the safety net that we've had in place for people for so very long. So those will be central issues in a campaign. But all this stuff is a lot of speculation right now. I just think there is a great contrast in age, and that would be an interesting factor going into November, but policy-wise is also a really great contrast. Yes?
Jeff Chambers, right here in Madison. You think Bloomberg's going to throw his hat in then and run independent? Or?
Well, Bloomberg's time is running out because he would have to do, like March is the deadline for most states to actually get in to do it. And I think what he did, I'm guessing when he was exploring the idea, he was trying to affect, and I don't think he was effective in doing it, who might come out of the primaries, because he was saying, well, if it's Sanders and Trump, then I'll get in. But it's more and more looking like it would be very hard for Bernie Sanders, I think, to take the Democratic nomination, especially after Tuesday, I think, by where the numbers are looking. And so I think he's less likely to probably look at it. I mean, you know, face it, billionaires have huge egos, and you know, Donald Trump, so that's another billionaire thought, well, if he can do it, maybe I'll do it. But logistically, he would have to right now be seriously on the ground. I mean, March 1st is tomorrow to do this, and he hasn't said a whole lot more on it. So I think, again, it was just some of those, hey, if this is where things are going, I might be able to get in the race, his ego a little bit getting out there. But I don't see that as a factor. The question would be, if you have a broker convention, what would Donald Trump do? And he could cause trouble to try to beat his ego, too. It's an interesting thing to watch in an election year. The problem is, for me in Washington, as we go on with the year, we get diminishing returns on getting anything done because the presidential campaign takes over. So then that means, you know, the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, all these other things that we should get done won't probably happen. Well, so I really appreciate this, and again, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and I know that you're going to do throughout the year. And again, thank you for having your union is one of the hardest working unions fighting the Trans-Pacific Partnership right now. I really appreciate that because we are on the cusp of winning something that people would have bet strongly against us winning. It's been really tight and close all along. We're going to have to keep being vigilant all the way up to the election, got to hold people accountable, but more important, after the election, make sure people vote the way they told you. Because if you can't change people's minds, sometimes you have to change their faces. So let's continue watching that through November. And again, thank you very much for your time this morning. Appreciate it.